Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. This is going to be the second video of a four-part series on basically how to make a show file for theater specifically. This is a bit of a casual webinar, so if you guys have any kind of questions, we'll go off on random tangents, and sometimes me and Megan will just kind of discuss different ways that we approach different problems on the console and in just, approaching creating a show in general. So it is thundering here in Austin, Texas, so hopefully we don't lose our power. And of course, we also don't have dogs and animals, so you have to excuse those.
hmm
Megan, do you have anything you want to add before we kind of get started on our topics for the day?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be a fun one. A lot more things to grasp, I feel like. A lot more tips and tricks than the last one. Because the last one was a lot of like, if you missed the last one, it was a lot of like patching and setting up your show file. And this one we start doing palettes and groups, and hopefully we'll get into some queuing also, depending on how much we decide to talk.
How much time we have left? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and switch this over here. The first thing that we're actually going to talk about is the function of the console, which is called highlight and lowlight. So highlight is really great for finding your fixtures as well as troubleshooting and adjusting cues. What's nice about highlight, if you don't use it normally, there's a highlight button on the front panel of every console right next to the blind and clear button. What essentially highlight does is it takes by default your fixtures that you have selected and it puts them to open white, so no color, no gobos, and keeps their position. It basically allows you to see your lights a little bit more brighter if they're on stage. So there is a highlight button. There's also a function in the console where you can have a highlight palette, and then you can also have what's called a low light palette. So low light basically means fixtures that are also in your active editor but are not currently selected. So you can actually determine whether or not lights need to be highlighted or low lighted depending on your selection. It has several different uses. Another one that's really good for is making groups and other things like that. So can't remember if I deleted these. Oh, I actually did create these earlier. So I'm going to delete these two palettes. And we're going to kind of just talk about the default behavior of what highlight looks like by default. So we'll go ahead and go into the group window here. And I'm just going to pick, let's do our downward wash. And I'm going to go ahead and enable highlight. So you'll note that I just put highlight on and my lights came on. However, if you look in the programmer, there is actually not any data for intensity. So keep in mind that if you have highlight on and you're going to record something, it does not actually record the intensity into whatever it is that you're recording. So highlight does not include intensity in the programmer. Highlight's really handy when you use it with different combinations of selection tools. So if I were to hit, say, next, and I can punch through each fixture one by one, I can make sure that the group I selected is in the right order. Or if I need to find a very specific light, for example, I wanted to find that backstage left light, I can use highlight to find it pretty quickly. So the default behavior is just open white. You can actually customize that a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just press clear here.
And it will, by default, it'll kick. You say open white, but just want to iterate also. It'll kick out color. So if you have highlight off and you're in red, you turn highlight on, it's going to kick out your color momentarily. It's not going to change anything in the programmer. It's just going to kick out your color while highlights turn. So like if you were to toggle highlight after that.
I think sometimes you do have to reassert highlight.
Well, so you're turning on the color while you have highlight on. If you change the color, turn off highlight, and then turn it back on, it'll take you to open white.
Yeah, I usually just double tap it, and that'll get it back to open white.
Yeah, it's in times I do that in times that my lights are already on in intensity, and then I highlight and go to open white and they're in a color, and I open white to go and figure out what light I'm adjusting at that point. But just reiterating, it is actually white. It's not just like no value inside the programmer. Like it's going to kick it out momentarily to white at that point. And I believe it does that for it takes out gobos, but I could be wrong about that one by default.
It does, if I remember correctly. I always forget how it all works. And
Yeah,
then
it
I
says.
get back into the workflow and it's like, oh, okay, that's how it
Mhm.
works.
I'm like, I know it's on in white. I know it's on. But yeah, it'll take you back to as open white as it can, meaning gobo goes away. Like I said, color goes away, and it's on at full all momentarily.
Right. So let's talk about how you can assign a highlight and a low light palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select those fixtures again, and I'm going to say at full, and I'm going to bring up the programmer so you guys can see what's actually being recorded. So currently data in the programmer is 100% intensity. I'm going to record that as a palette. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm just going to say record, I'm going to say global, and I think that's the only thing I need for this case. I'm going to record that into intensity palette 1. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but the next thing we're going to do is actually create the low light palette. So low light is customizable for however you as a user want to use it. I tend to do it on a kind of per fixture basis, but generally what I do is I say um, at 30%. Oops. There we go. So I usually do a 30% intensity, and then I usually throw in blue, which is just kind of a subtle color. So my light's kind of blue. And I'm going to hit record. Now, something to kind of keep in mind here is that the destination that I'm recording this to is the intensity directory. And the intensity directory by default only takes intensity values, which means that if I were to record this right now, it's only going to include that 30% value of information in the programmer and not any of that color information. So what I want to do on the bottom playback bar here, there's a button that says kind mask. And I basically want to say add all. So if that didn't show up, let me put it up on the left screen so you can see a little bit better. There's a little button that says kind mask. We're going to say add all. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and disable the time effects. I just want intensity and color. And I'm also going to record this as a global palette. We're actually going to talk about what global and per fixture and per type mean later in this webinar, but just for the sake of right now, I'm going to record this as a global palette. And it has been recorded. So I'm going to clear out my programmer. And if I right click on these two palettes, I'm going to right click and tell the first one to be a highlight palette and the second one to be a low light palette. You can only have one of each. So if you click another palette and you say low light or you say highlight, the other one, whatever it was previously, is no longer going to be a highlight or low light palette. And let's take a look at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those down mover spots and I'm going to switch y'all back over to the visualizer. So highlight is on, and they do come up in open white. Now, I'm going to tell these fixtures to have some sort of information. So actually, I'm going to say at 50. Now, they don't seriously go to 50. They're still saying at 100% because of highlight. But because I've added information into the programmer for those fixtures specifically, they're going to stay in the programmer. And now if I were to hit next, I can see the other fixtures are in a low light palette. So you can see the other 7 fixtures that I don't have selected are following the information from that low light palette, whereas the fixture that I have selected currently is in the highlight palette. A really kind of handy tool that I use highlight for is for making groups. So you'll note that if I'm punching through the fixture selection here, it goes, so it goes to the first from the front right, I guess you might say, so up stage left, and it goes across and then back and across and back and across and back and across. I actually like to use a little bit of a handy tool for highlight for finding fixtures. So if I, for example, wanted my fixture selection to go from downstage to upstage on one side and then from downstage to upstage on the other, I do a little bit of a kind of a neat trick. So I'll select this all these fixtures, and I'm going to tell them actually to all go to full. And then I'm going to select the first fixture. And this is just a little trick of the trade that I've kind of picked up. And if you guys like it, great. If not, no big deal. But I'm going to tell this first fixture to go to 10%. And I'm going to find the next fixture that I want. And I'm going to tell that fixture to go to 20%. The next fixture I'm going to tell to go to 30%. And the next one I'm going to do at 4. And then come back to the next fixture that I want to select, and I'm going to say at 5. Oops. I'm going to say at 6. You're probably thinking, Noah, what the heck are you doing? And I'm going to say at 8 on this last fixture. So I know that seems kind of like an odd little trick, but the reason why I did it that way is if I deselect my fixtures and then I select them in the order that I gave those intensity values at, so I'm going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And that was a pretty easy order. Thankfully, they're actually pretty symmetrical. I've actually now recorded these fixtures in a completely different order. So I'm going to record that as a random group. What's neat about this is now when I start fanning or writing effects or doing anything that deals with delayed options, it's going to actually follow that order that I recorded in the group. So you might find use out of that. This is a little trick that I've kind of picked up along the way with programming, especially when I've got like a very odd arrangement of fixtures. Like if I've got 5 fixtures on one truss and then 3 on the next and then 2 on the next one, and I want to make a group where they go across, but I don't exactly know all the fixture numbers. I don't have to type in each number one by one and try to find them. I can use kind of highlight and kind of assign them individual intensity values in the programmer and then click them up, basically. So I don't know. It's just a random tangent that I randomly tell people, but if you find use for that, great. Maegan, do you have anything you want to add? I kind of been talking for a bit.
No, you're good. I just do my low light of at 100%, not at a different intensity. That way they for sure come on. But I also stick in blue. I mean, it's just all whatever.
Oh, user preference.
Yeah, and my highlight usually just stays default because open white, taking it out, is pretty nifty. Just for what I usually use it for. But also something to mention inside the palettes is for the highlight palette, or for the low light palette, for example, you only put in intensity and color information. So if you have like a beam, if you have something inside your beam or something inside like an effect, it's not going to take out those, it's not going to make those go back to a default value. For example, it's going to keep those in. So just be aware when you're making your palettes, if you don't put a value in there, it's not going to kick it out momentarily. And remember, this is all momentarily. I just want to reiterate that it's all momentary. So as soon as you turn off highlight, your fixtures are going to go off. So if you're recording cues and your highlight makes the fixtures go on to full and you're like, oh, that looks good, record, choose, puts in that fader, go back to play that, fader's all the way up and there's no light. Well, you probably recorded with highlight turned on. So just be aware that
Guilty.
that is a thing. I do it at least once a show. It is a thing that I go back and I'm like, okay, let me merge that intensity in and we're good. Let's keep going. But yeah, so just be aware of highlight. I use highlight more for, rather than groups, I use it for more of like positions that I need. Just because positions and beams. So like if I'm trying to do an even stage wash, then I can take like my wash 2000s, or I believe that's what's in here. So I can take my wash fixtures, put them in the general location, and then start going next one at a time and getting that nice even wash all the way through. And I know where the holes are because I have that low light palette taking the fixtures to the blue color. So I can see where to fit in whatever fixture I've highlighted. And same thing, and I also use highlight as my fixture check in the morning or at the beginning of the day. And that way, just highlight, we know it's at full, adjust, pan, and tilt, hit next, and just keep going one at a time. It's just one of the, it's my fixture check tool as well.
I'm going to make just a really quick group here, a really quick position of some sorts. So I just threw together a quick position, and I'm going to record that into a position palette. So hit record, touch on that position. And that's just another good handy use for highlight. If you hold down open and you open up that position, it brings up that as an active editor so you can see the values that are on stage. Now, the blind key has come on, so anytime that you open up an active editor, the blind key does come on. It's right next to the highlight key for good reason. So I'm going to uncheck blind, and you'll note that you didn't really see any difference on stage, but now I can tell you put highlight on, and now I can see those fixtures, and I'm actually looking at this palette specifically. And once again, I can do next, and I can punch through each fixture to make sure it is focused to wherever I need it to be. And if I needed to update something, so for example, maybe that back fixture here I need to actually have there, and then the next one, it's not really up enough, so I'll move it over to here. Another really handy way of just updating a palette really quickly by using that highlight function. And now that I've made that update, or made those changes in the palette, I hit update, and that's it. That palette's now updated, and I can reselect it with those fixtures. And those changes have been made. So just another use for highlight is using it within palettes that don't need intensity values put in them. So that's my notes for highlight and low light. Maybe anything else you want to add before we kind of start talking about groups?
Not for highlight and low light. So let's jump into groups then, let's just jump into groups. And remember, guys, if y'all have questions, please feel free to ask. We will be more than happy to answer. Hopefully these tips and tricks are good. So let's jump in about groups. So these are just some of the must-have groups. I'm going to talk about mine because I think Noah has a bit more than me, but mine are all the ones that Noah has plus like 10 more. But I'm going to talk about mine first and like which groups I like to make sure I have. And one that we don't actually have in here is I like to have like the general all group. I kind of talked about that in the scenes, webinar, where I like to have that all fixture group. So if I need to quickly, and usually it's more so for busking purposes, but I still put it also in here inside my theater shows just because I'm usually going to need to fake stuff that applies globally to all the fixtures at some point in time that I want to be able to copy and paste to other fixtures also. So I just keep that all group. I hit the auto palette button, so that's what gets me all my types. I do keep all of the different fixture types, especially because I'll have those cyc lights versus the source floors versus the parkans versus the Fresnels. So I'll use those generic fixture types, and then my groups are already pretty much done at that point. Of course, we have the positions, so what's on pipe on electric 1, electric 2, electric 3, pipe 1, 2, 3, all that good stuff, all by position. So I'll have like, here's electric 1, all of electric 1, here's the source 4s on electric 1, here's the Fresnels on electric 1, here's my movers on electric 1. Like, I'll break it down into that small, just in case I need it at that point, because you never know, like, that you might need to turn all the Fresnels on electric 1 to blue at some point in time, or turn them all on at some point in time. So it's just easy to hit the button and you're not hunting for the user numbers at that point. Let's see, what else would I do? Also, so cyc lights, of course, are going to get one, and then the reverse order on the cyc lights. So if I'm going stage left to stage right, I will also record a group for stage right to stage left. Just because you never know when you're going to go from left to right or right to left. Having that group already made is perfect. If I'm dealing with, and those are generally like the general groups that I like to deal with, positions, types, having the all, and then making sure your fixture selections are right. So again, either going stage left to stage, and then making sure you have different directions. So stage left to stage right to stage left, all that kind of stuff. One other that I will also put in here is two others, house lights and work lights also get their own groups. That way I can just quickly turn them on, hit it full, park them if I need to, especially for those work lights. That way they're just at a quick button push. Noah, what other groups do you have?
I do a lot of kind of what you just mentioned. But I kind of do something a little weird where I do it by the type of lamp that the fixture is. So I'll do like all of my red, green, blue fixtures. I'll do all of my red, green, blue, white fixtures. I'll do all of my arc lamp fixtures, all of my white source fixtures. And I just do that so that when I'm making my palettes for color, I can kind of grab everything for that. Or if I'm going to be striking some arc lamp fixtures, I can just select all of them right then and there. So that's just something that I tend to do. There's kind of a somewhat hidden feature on the console in the programmer window that not a lot of people actually know about. And basically, in the programmer window, if you right-click on this little header here, there's a couple of different hidden options, but one of them is show selection orders. Now it's not showing up right now because I've already brought it up. I'll hide it again. So show and then cell order. And what's kind of nice about that is if you are recording groups and you're trying to be conscious about which way you recorded the groups, you're not familiar with the syntax or you're just kind of learning it or whatever, excuse me, you can check the selection order by enabling it in the programmer. So you can see that 301, which would normally be the first selected fixture here, would normally have a 1 here, but I actually selected this in reverse order. So it actually goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All the way going back. And actually I did this slightly incorrect because I actually needed to do 312.6 through 301.1. Enter. There you go. So now actually it's going in the correct order from the left side of the stage. Go ahead and switch this over to capture again. Cell by cell. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you don't understand the reason why you might want to do that, just keep in mind that there's functions in the console like fanning and effect offsets, and your selection order is really important for those functions. So if you don't do any of that, then that's totally fine. Maybe you don't need a reverse group, but we tend to do that quite a bit. I also tend to do a couple of just completely shuffled groups. So on your select toolbar, so that's this little button here, on the bottom left-hand corner, so say 301 through enter. Currently, everything is selected in numerical order, starting at the lowest number going to the highest. On your select toolbar, so I hit select in the bottom left-hand corner, I'll hit select, and I'll hit shuffle. And you'll note that the selection order is now in a randomized order. And I can do that a couple of times, so I can hit select, shuffle, and I can record a couple of just different random groups. Once again, it just completely shuffles which fixtures are selected in what order. And so if I were to do like a fan right now, so I'll take these fixtures to red and do a little bit of fanning, you'll note that I kind of get some interesting diffusion or interesting variation there because my fixtures are selected in a random order. Just kind of keep that in mind. You can do those things. Those are usually other groups I'll record, a completely random group. Any questions anybody have right now? We'll be kind of quiet today.
One other thing about groups is, again, or not one other thing, but to reiterate, like Noah said, is to keep your selection order in mind. Excuse me. Whether it's to speed up your programming, so like if you build an effect in a very specific selection order, what I like to do, and if like you ever watch me program, I don't think anyone will watch me program in a very long time, but if I select in a very specific order, before I hit clear, I make sure I record that into a group. Just because when you record a group, it's going to record your selection order, and you never know when the director's going to be like, hey, can you make that effect happen again?
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool in scene number 512, which is 1,000 pages later. Well, if you've had hit clear without hitting that group button, without recording that group, you would have to go back to that original view. And I think if you just do a live select, it might restore your fixture selection. I think it does. I don't remember if it does off the top of my head. But if you remember to record that group and just toss it in there, and it doesn't even, I mean, I would probably just say for a label, because it's always good to label your groups. For a label, I'd probably just say whatever queue it was originally from or what effect it was for, and then record it, store it. Then it's just that one tap whenever the director or the designer says, hey, can you recall that cool effect that you did before in that specific order? And you're like, yeah, I can. It's right here. It's one button push instead of hold on and let's wait 5 minutes while I go and figure it out. It's all about saving you time, saving you headaches, making sure you get hired back again.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So this file, I will totally admit, we haven't really modified it a whole lot. We trying to keep it very simplified. But when it comes to organization in just about any directory, I'm going to kind of cover a couple of quick things that you can do. So let me go ahead and switch to the left-hand screen here. So most people know this, that if you drag and drop left click and then right click, you can color code various different functions or various different groups on your console. You can also, there's some people that prefer to have the entire button color coded. So if you go to this little drop down here, there's a button for color code entire button. I'm going to apply, and the whole button is completely lit up. Some people prefer the previous method. I kind of like this method. I prefer the whole button to be colored, but Megan, you're shaking your head. I can't remember which one you like.
Oh, I like this way. I can't see the outlines, or I get confused with like the selected outline versus like the actual color outline if my color is purple.
Right.
So I like filled in all the way.
And so something that I do, and not a lot of people kind of pick up on, but there's actually a second way to label your groups, and this works in any directory, not just groups, but in scene directory, cue list directory, position, anything that's a directory, you can do this. But there's actually a comment field. So a lot of times what I like to do is in the comment field, I'll put some extra information. So I'll put, I think these are front lights, if I remember correctly. I'll put front light. And if you look here, now on the bottom of that little directory palette here, it will carry over that information that I added. You can also use this for copying things. So I'm just going to record some blank groups here. There's nothing in them. That's totally fine. But if I wanted to copy and paste something, so if I wanted to say copy this name scheme here, and I wanted to copy it here, that can all be done on the console as well. So you can't do that in this mode, in the sort of grid mode, but if you put it into list mode, you can copy the names, and you can also copy in the colors. So where this is really handy is if you've created very specific color palettes, and you need to take those colors from your color palettes and transfer them to another directory, a position directory, or maybe you have a scene directory. You don't have to recolor each one of those automatically. You can simply copy them in one directory and then paste them into another. So there's a little handy trick that I've kind of picked up along the way. I prefer to keep the information in the name column as simple as could be, and then I tend to usually put the comment, usually either the fixture type or what the function of the light is. And then color coding helps a lot with that as well. Megan, anything you want to add on organization? Actually, I have one more thing I wanted to mention before I move on. You'll notice that there's this little button here in the top of the directory called guard. If you don't ever use guard, basically it's good for a couple of things, but guard does the opposite of what it would normally do in your directory. Let me rephrase that. So with guard disabled, you're actually activating that item. So but with guard disabled and I hit all fixtures, I just selected all fixtures. With guard enabled and I select all fixtures, the function of that palette, or the name of that palette, actually shows up on my command line. And because it shows up on my command line, I can then enter a command with it. So if I hit enter, it would select those fixtures. Or if I were to say all fixtures and I hit move, and now I click, I can now move it without actually selecting those fixtures. So guard's good if you want to reorganize your directory, but you don't want to actually select all those things. The pig key will always do the opposite of guard. So if I hit pig and I hit all fixtures, with guard enabled, it did select them this time. Whereas if I disable guard and I hold down pig and press all fixtures, it put it on my command line, but didn't select them. So it's doing the opposite of whatever state guard is in. So it's really handy if you just need to do a quick change. You hold down pig and you press that palette and you can move it around, copy it, or delete it really easily.
I like to say with guard unselected, so right now guard is not turned on, then you have the cells are actionable, meaning whatever you tap on, it's going to happen. Whereas with guard turned on, the cells are selectable, meaning it just goes into the command line waiting for the next thing to happen. But that's just how I can differentiate in my brain. Just keep it nice and simple.
And that is view specifics. You can record guard enabled or disabled on a view basis. So if you would record a view, so like any of these buttons up here, and you have guard enabled when you record it, it will always turn guard back on if you recall that view. Same thing, you'll actually note that these palettes are now the outline instead of the whole button. So that's another thing. It does store that information into the view whenever you do record it. So just keep that in mind. So that's all I had to say for kind of groups and working with the show. I'm ready to move on to palettes if you are, Megan.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had a idea for another webinar, so I was writing that down. Um,
It's always a good idea.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, no, I'm good with groups. I think we kind of covered groups. They store your fixture. I don't think we actually said what groups are. They store your fixture selection and they allow you to quickly select fixtures. Hopefully y'all gathered that as we were explaining how we made our groups. But now it's time to talk about palettes. I'm just going to do a quick brief overview again, kind of like I did for groups, and then Noah's probably going to walk us through some more examples. But palettes can be used, and I'll just give an overview of what they are. Palettes can be used to quickly put your fixtures into programming that you can just use over and over and over again. And then what's nifty about palettes is if you make the update, depending on the palette, if you make an update to the palette, it can update your queuing or your programming, your queues. That way, if you decide halfway through the show, hey, the blue I've been using is too purple, well, you can go back and adjust that color palette, and now that blue is not as purple. Or you are using a solo spot, or we'll go with an older fixture, a studio spot that you had to take down and change the lamp on. And then you put it back up, and now it's like 3 inches over from where it was before because the people hanging just didn't pay attention to where it was before. If you use position palettes, then that studio spot, you just update those position palettes that are used in your queues, and then you can just keep going, and you don't have to go back and manually update each queue that studio spot is in. Just update that position palette that are used in all the queue that's used, and then you're good to go. Now we're going to kind of talk a little bit about why we like to use palettes more so than just the overview. Noah, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I mean, palettes are whenever you want to make them. Let's see if I remember what fixtures. 121. That's the fixtures we're going to be using. So let me go ahead and get the visualizer back up on screen for you guys. Kind of what Megan said. Palettes are referenced. So what that means is if you use a palette and you record that into a queue or a scene or any sort of playback item, and then you come back and you update that palette, it's going to update that queue or update that playback item. So the example that I give in just about every class it's a very classic example of if you have a palette that focuses on your drum riser and you're going from one venue to another, and your drum riser is 6 feet upstage, 6 feet downstage, he's a little bit higher today, now he's over a little bit to the left. Instead of you having to go in and update every single queue or every single item in your show file, as long as you used palettes, you can just update that palette and it works accordingly. It's also good for if you're you're a busker, you're running live, you're going from one fixture type to another. A lot of times they tend to do a palette for different gobos, but they kind of keep the gobo name generic, right? So instead of having palettes for each fixture type, they just say, hey, this is the circle gobo. The circle gobo on this fixture might be gobo 1 on wheel 1, and it might be gobo 3 on wheel 2 on the next one. So that's why they'll just update their palettes, and it won't always look the same because there might be slightly different gobos, but the idea is there essentially. There's a lot you can do with palettes. I mean, we could maybe put an entire video on just the first half of palettes, I would say.
I think we did.
We did, didn't we?
Uh-huh.
On our study hall.
There is an old study hall webinar video of palettes, like really deep diving into palettes more than the overview and the tips and tricks we're going to give you. But yeah, there is. I would definitely suggest going to watch it especially if you're new to Hog and you're trying to figure out how palettes work and how they get associated with what you know on your console. Like, I would definitely go and watch that video. Not that we say anything that like this is equal to this on this console, but we do describe very well all the different palette types that might be a bit more helpful.
Right. So let's, as I said, currently we don't have any palettes recorded. Let's talk about a couple of different ways to record them. So Just like anything in Hog, you have to have information in your programmer first to record things. So I'm going to say 121 through at full. So those are my wash fixtures there. And we're just going to create a little position here. I'm not really pretty, but we're just going to create something like that. And we're going to hit record, and we're going to plop it into a position palette. So it has now been recorded, which means that if I were to clear out 121 through enter, and I say at full, and I click that palette, it goes right there. So this is a good way to store your information. Earlier in the video, we talked about how you can update those, so you can hold down open and you can touch it. But there's a couple of different types of palettes to keep in mind, and this kind of trips a lot of early programmers up when they're getting used to the console. So there's a couple of different ways that palettes get recorded. There's a couple of rules that are applied to them. So the first type of palette is what's called a per fixture palette. Okay, a per fixture palette means that each individual fixture has data applied to it. The next one, and I'm going to give you all some examples too here. The next one is a per type palette. So a per type palette means that that value is applied to everything of that fixture type specifically. So solo spots is one type, solo wash is another, ellipsoidal or front light is another. The cyc light RGB lights are going to be another type essentially. And then you have what's called global. And the global palette is meant to be used for anything. So this first palette that I recorded actually was a per fixture palette. And what that means is that there is individual values for every single fixture when I recorded. So you'll note that I have data in this palette for only fixtures 121 to 128. I don't have any data for any of the other fixtures. What that means is that if I were to select any other fixtures, so if I were to select the down mover spots, those palettes will gray out because there's not any data for them. So what I'm going to do now is going to record a per type palette, and I'm going to do this with precision. So I'm actually going to select, only going to select fixture 111. I'm going to say 111, enter, tell it to go to full, and I'm just going to crank it, I don't know, about negative 55 degrees back. And I'm going to hit record, and I'm going to say per type here at the bottom on my record options, and we're going to select that into this position directory now. Now, if I select all of them, 111 through enter, you'll note that now all of these fixtures get that same data. So that was a per type palette. In position, it might not be super needed, but for something like color, it might, because if I were to add more of that fixture type, I don't have to create and update all those palettes one by one. There's already data on a per type basis. Another reason why you might want to do it per type is, especially for color, is that not all fixtures mix color the same way. So if you have a bunch of red, green, blue fixtures and you have a bunch of CMY fixtures, they're not going to get the same values for a color matched red or a color matched blue. So that's where you would want to go into the per type function and say, hey, all of these fixtures of this type, red is these values, and all the fixtures of this type, your red is these values. That way you don't have to have multiple palettes for the same sort of colors. So that was per type, and then the next one is going to be global. It means that it can be applied to any fixture type with those values. So we'll say 121 through enter, and we'll just do something very similar. We'll just say a little bit off kilter. There we go, there's a palette. And we're going to say record global. We're going to click on position 4 now. And what's neat about this is if I were to select other fixture types, so if I were to select the down mover spots, they can actually get those same pan and tilt values from that global palette. So we can look at them. I'm going to open up that last one, and you can see here that it says global all. So any fixture type that has this information can use this palette. 0 degrees of pan, negative 32 degrees of tilt. And then we have this previous one, which is per type, and it's going to say type, solo frame 750, has this value of pan and this value of tilt. And then the first one we recorded It just has the actual numbers, and that's considered a per fixture palette. So those are just different types of palettes that you can record. The different directories that you record into do have different default behaviors. For example, the color directory does default to global as long as all the values are the same, whereas the position directory does default to per fixture, regardless of whether or not the fixtures are the same. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're recording. Maegan, do you have anything to add on that stuff?
No, not pertaining to recording. I just want to say, like, if when I'm recording, like the palettes that I make sure to record, since we haven't added that, I'm going to transition away from like how to like what I like to make position palettes and beam palettes and color palettes for. I make color palettes for every color I color mix in the show. So as soon as I color mix a palette, as soon as I color mix something for a scene, I will record that as a color palette, to be honest. Like, you never, I mean, it's again, comes back to I never know when I'm going to use that color again. I'll have my basics, my red, green, blue, CMY, white. Like, I'll keep those there as well. But then as soon as I've color mixed a color, I'm happy with it. It then also then gets added into my color directory. It gets added as a color palette. Hopefully it's global. If it's not, but if it's per fixture, it works. Just to be safe. Per type, I will also try to use for color palettes as much as possible. There's those different manufacturers that both use CMY glass, but the CMY glass is just completely different saturations. So you will need, so by having per type in there for the solo spots different than the Verilights that are up, then it makes sense to have per type so that the red looks the same. That way it doesn't matter whether I'm pulling up a solo spot fixture versus a Verilight fixture. It'll the reds will be matched because I did a per type. And then so color palettes I just record for every color that I mix in the show. Position palettes I record for every location that I have on the scene for scenes. So, and what I mean by that is if scene like generally a set for theater is going to be broken up into different locations based on like here, like for in the Heights, it's like you have the bodega scene, you have the general, like where we're going to use the whole stage, and then you have another like location possibly. I will build general position palettes that just get my movers to that location. That way I can start tweaking based on that, and I don't have to completely pan around my lights like all the way around because they were pointed 180 degrees from the stage. I can just push the button and then start working from there. And then beam palettes, I also really like, especially for focusing with gobos and shutters. The one thing that I'll do for beam though is my focus palette. I'll just have a general, and we kind of talked on this in the last one with Matt, where I just have a general Gobo Wheel 1 focus palette and then a general Gobo Wheel 2 focus palette. And then I'll have and then I don't have per gobo palettes though for the beam because I'll use my slot toolbar for that or the media picker to get those in. And then for shutters, I will also anytime that I shutter cut to a window or to a wall or make a specific slice of the stage like light up and light, then I will also record those in my beam directory and just get that beam palette directly in there just because you never know when you need that exact angle again. It's all about saving me time in the future as well. Hopefully that all makes sense. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Noah, do you have anything to add to that? I think we're pretty much on the same page for that stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna see how fast I can do a shutter cut. I'm always terrible at shutter.
Again, it's also why I make a palette as soon as it's done.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Especially when that door moves like 2 feet to the right for some reason, because that happens all the time.
Right.
I'm not being sarcastic
And
at all.
that's where the spike was laid, was when it was off whenever it was already off spike. We just moved the spike to be where it was at that point, which means forever now it will be that new point. But no matter that you have 60 cues for where it was before. Yeah.
Cool.
Never happened.
And if you guys want to know more about palettes, we're kind of doing kind of a quick overview because we do have a whole webinar that was actually specifically for that. If y'all have any Q&A, I haven't checked the Q&A recently.
Someone just asked, Cesar just asked where they can see past tutorials. I am getting a link to the playlist there.
So there's I'll explain it while you find the link, but there's basically an ETC study hall page, so that's actually separate from the High End Systems YouTube page. There's a study hall YouTube page, and that's where you'll find all of the webinars that we do during this time.
Yep, and I just posted in the chat for the link as well. That's just the direct playlist. It looks like they don't have the last one up there, but it might be that I forgot to put the link. So sometimes it's either like video team hasn't gotten there yet, or I forgot to put the link on our card to actually start it. Start that process, but I will have to check that after this video. Usually that's on my like checklist to do after the video. Anyway, sorry. Well, anything else with palettes? Or are we...
I guess there's one more rule I want to mention, in that it seems pretty obvious, but people kind of forget it. But if you record into a palette, keep in mind the masking behavior. So position directory is only going to take position values. The beam directory is only going to take beam values. The color directory will take color values, unless you overwrite it. So that's where that kind mask button is. So at the bottom of your desk, there's that kind mask button. So if you do want to put beam values or color values into a position directory, you can override it on a temporary basis by using that kind mask button there at the bottom of your screen. If you know that you want to do it pretty frequently, so like I will sometimes do this in my effect directory, where I'll make it to where my effect directory includes everything.
We can't see that window.
Yeah, it's a sub window. There you go. So I'll make it so that my effect directory has all the different functions in it, so that way I can get exactly what I recorded. But that comes down to you as a user on how you want to set up your directories. Yeah, that kind of sums up what I wanted to say without getting too far into the mix.
I'm gonna, since you talked about kind masking briefly, I'm gonna say that hitting the auto kinds button is what I always do for especially for theater shows, just because then I can just have that focus palette that I was talking about. Because right now we just have the standard intensity, position, color, beam, effects, time, control. But if I were to hit that auto palettes button, or if Noah does at some point, you don't have to though. If we were to hit that auto kinds button, it's gonna take every single parameter that exists in the show file. So position, focus, zoom, iris, and put it as a kind mask. So now I can just have that focus and record only the focus into my beam palette. Or I could only record shutters into my beam palette if I want to. Or I could only record the gobo wheel. I don't have to record everything that's inside that beam palette, and I don't have to knock it out of my programmer just to get that one thing. Again, just putting it out there. Just putting it out there that this is a really good tool that I think a lot of people should start utilizing a bit more to get very specific palettes if you need to.
Do you want to do an overview on your own user kinds, either in maybe the end of this video because it came up, or the next one? I don't know where it might fit in, but it does. I mean, I don't do it for rock and roll. We can do it
right now while we're talking about kind masks, to be honest. Like, instead of trying to...
Let's do it.
Unless you really wanted to get to queuing.
So let's do it. Let's do it.
Great.
Just because I love this. I really like this feature a lot on our
I do too. And it actually speeds up my programming because... Can we make the one that I have inside my head right now?
I'll follow along.
All right, great. So in Hog, besides the auto kind feature, you can also make your own custom kinds. Meaning I can have my own button. It goes on that function keys, those command and kind keys. I can have my own button that can do certain things. That can have specific parameters. So go ahead and record that next empty kind for me. I think it's 30.
Yep.
And then open it. So you just record an empty kind, and then you open your kind editor. And how this works is this: you have this gray box here. I'm touching my screen, like y'all can actually see me like touch the screen where it is. You have the 4 encoder wheels like in that window. Those correspond to the encoder wheels on your front panel. So the first one goes with the first one, all that good stuff. But what I like to do, and this is going to be a very specific use case, is if I put my gobo rotate, zoom, and then focus across my encoder wheels, and if you notice, after Noah puts those on there, you have a second encoder wheel bank. I will then go and put Gobo 2 right underneath where Gobo is, and then Gobo 2 rotate if I have a fixture that does it.
This one doesn't.
We might not have fixtures that do it right underneath. And then I put zoom and focus back on those last two. I keep zoom and focus on my last two encoders so that I actually know where zoom and focus actually is the entire time, and I don't have to bump between things. So now if Noah hits apply, then if you were to select the fixtures, I'm guessing there's like some spots in here that has this stuff. Sorry, I'm not familiar with the rig completely.
Yeah, we're still learning it.
So then if you page over on your kinds to that last one we made, kind 30, and you tap it, you can see that we have Gobo rotate, zoom, focus, then Noah taps it again, and you get your Gobo 2, and if this had Gobo 2 rotate, and then you have your zoom and focus still in the same area. So my hand doesn't have to move from zoom and focus. I just know position. I know muscle memory. My last two encoder wheels have zoom and focus there by default. If I'm on a console that has 5 encoder wheels, I'll actually toss iris there as well at the end. Just because sometimes if you iris a gobo to get like the edges like cut off, it looks better than just letting it fall off into the abyss of the metal. But that is the auto kind that I really like make. So that way, again, zoom and focus is just always there. Muscle memory, it doesn't change spots. It's just always there.
And you can actually go in and modify the default user kinds. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that.
I do this sometimes also to put tilt and then pan. So it's intensity, tilt, and then pan. That way, tilt is on that second encoder wheel, where it makes sense. Because you always have to tilt before you pan.
I'm gonna pretend like you didn't say that.
That's okay. You can, but
you can't do that to me. I've gotten on shows before where they have their own user kinds all configured in their show file, and I'm just like, what did you do to it? But like this is something that I will do a lot. Is I'll just go intensity, pan, tilt, zoom. I usually just need those on one page, and that's been applied to my position kinds. Now, if I select fixtures and hit position, I now have zoom, which is not normally on position there at all, and I have access to that on my fourth encoder. Just a handy little tool. There's more that goes into auto kinds, especially when it comes to like data management and sucking and touching values. I don't think we'll probably go into that on this webinar video, but we do have lots of information on that in our previous videos as well.
Yeah.
Unless you want to talk about Maegan. I don't. I think that it might go a little too far for this webinar.
Yeah, I think that would probably be good for the next one. Tease it a little bit. And the next one, we'll talk about sucking and touching and all that good stuff. Now, I do want to mention, you had said something, and now I can the adjusting the defaults. I like it sometimes, and then I don't like it sometimes. Like, I like being able to walk up to every console and know exactly, like, what I'm getting into by just pushing those buttons. So most of the time I won't adjust them. I'll just make my own custom user kinds. But if I'm feeling like I want to adjust and I'm not doing anything else but, like, this one show file, I will also go and adjust my color kind to where... Well, I guess hue and sat is by itself already by default, but I make sure that hue and saturation is for sure by default the first two. I think it's like that by default already. But if I have like RGBW fixtures, I'll put hue sat white there. Or if I have like sorry, the cat decided to play with my board. So if I like, and she's lowering my volume. So if I will also put like hue sat red or hue sat white amber on one encoder wheel because I stick in that hue sat area. But again, most of the time I like to keep them default. It's just a nifty feature to do.
It also depends if you're on a 4 or 5 encoder desk. Because I think when you're on a 5 encoder, you get HueSat CMY on one page. When you're on a 4 encoder desk, you get them on 2 different pages.
That makes sense. Remember correctly. And that would be why I don't remember, because I try to get on the full bore as much as possible.
Same. All right.
Cool. So we can, if you do, you guys have questions that you want to pause that you guys have right now? I think we've caught up on Q&A and anything in chat, but
We're about to have the big lighting discussion on tracking. Dun dun dun. Uh, so yeah, we'll see if there's anything else in the Q&A that we can answer in the meantime. Otherwise, we're going to kind of move on ahead to tracking, which is, I don't know, I feel like it's like the birds and bees of the hog, or birds and bees of lighting, I guess. What is this grand thing? And, oh, I don't like it. Oh, but it's actually great.
and like,
So go
yeah,
ahead.
no, go for it.
Uh, I mean, I like your explanation of tracking, but I also like my explanation, so we're just going to kind of figure it out together on how we want to explain this. But tracking is this really beautiful function that pretty much any modern lighting desk will do. And essentially the rule of it is it's LTP, or latest takes precedence. So a light will not do anything unless it is told to do otherwise. Now, in the theater world, there's kind of a, I guess, some people don't like tracking, I guess you'll say. I think it's extremely useful as long as you just know how it works and you just know why it's intended to be that way. So let's just go ahead and make a couple of really simple cues here. So we're going to say 121 cue at full. We're going to call that our first cue. So I'm going to hit record. And I'm going to put that onto master 10. So that's my first cue. It's been recorded. And in the next one, we'll just put it in one of those positions that we made earlier. And I'm going to hit record. And I'm going to click on master 10. And that's just going to just dump it into the next available cue, which is cue number 2. And then we're going to pick a color, hit record, choose master 10. And then let's add a, oh, they don't do yellow, that's okay. Let's see, let's do a zoom out. No, we'll do a type zoom, that's kind of neat. And record that onto the next one. And then we're just going to change a bunch of stuff all together. So let's do a wide zoom. Defocus, completely change the color. Actually, let's fan it. I didn't say I was a designer. I said I was a programmer.
That's why I don't design and I only program.
You can't make me do something pretty on the spot. And we'll just completely, change up this position again, right? So here we are. We've got some different cues. We'll hit record, put that onto this master. So now we've got 5 cues essentially. Let's take a look at them kind of one by one. So we'll play the first cue, and our lights come on. Oh, my fader's up. That'll always get you. So first one, lights are on in white. Next one, we have a position change. Next one, we have a color change. Next one, we have zoom change. And the last one, we have pretty much everything changes, right? We get zoom, color, and position. So let's talk about how tracking works. And so the data from all these cues is currently tracking down through the mix. So if I were to go into here in this position, and if I were to say, let's do 121, let's use highlight here. 121 through enter, see at 10, highlight. We'll find the last 2 fixtures, which is this fixture. And I'm going to say at 0. Is this size this programmer? And on the last fixture, oops. I'm going to tell that fixture at 0. And then everything else, so 121 through enter, until those go full. Actually, I'm going to knock those out. And I'm going to say record Q1, enter. It's going to tell me this Q already exists. I'm going to merge it in. I'm going to press clear. So now, if we look at this Q, those lights are actually off. And if we were to start punching through, you'll know that they continue to stay off. And that's kind of the premise of tracking. So data will track through a Q list. What's kind of handy is you can also kind of update your information in several ways. So for example, if you're in this fourth queue and you wanted your lights to not be red, instead you wanted them to be blue, but you don't remember exactly what queue you made that change in, you don't have to punch through your queues until you find and you go, I think it was this one. So we could be in this queue. I'm going to select these fixtures. I'm going to say 121 through enter, and we'll do a different color. Like it would be a bright blue cyan there. What's kind of neat is there's a really handy button called Update and then Track Backwards. So this is a subscreen, so I'm going to show you guys on my left-hand monitor. But basically, if you hit Update, and you could update this queue specifically, but we're actually going to say Update, and we're going to say Track Backwards. We're going to hit OK. Going to clear the programmer, and we're going to take a look at our queues again. So let's switch back to the visualizer. So here we are in the first queue. Our lights are white because we never had color here. Switch over to the next queue, lights get our position. Switch over to the next queue, and our lights are blue. So what it actually did is it updated the queue where we made that change, essentially. Now, if we were to go forward, you'll note that it did not track through to the last queue because there was already data there, essentially. So keep that in mind, that you can kind of track your changes backwards if you need to, which is really handy whenever you just don't know when that queue was that you wanted to make your change, or if you made a position change and a gobo change and it was in two different queues that change happened, it'll update track backwards to each of the queues independently. Another question that I get a lot, especially from the EOS programmers that are using Hog, is, well, how do I make something queue only, right? So how do I make a queue without affecting any of the other queues in the mix? So what I'll do here is I will pig release, and we're going to create something really quickly. I'm going to say 121 through at full, and we'll just do something where let's do it where half is white, half is blue, and then reselect everything. Half is white, half is red. Reselect everything, and we'll just say that this is a queue that you wanted to record, but you didn't want this queue to affect other queues, essentially. And switch back over to our queue list here again. And so if you wanted this queue specifically in between Q4 and between Q5, you can record that into the queue without affecting them by essentially disabling what's called track forward. So go ahead and give you guys a left screen again. I'm going to hit record, and if you look on your toolbar here, your track forward is always enabled by default, but I'm going to disable it, and I'm going to say Q4.5 enter, and then I'm going to clear out my programmer. And hopefully, if I did this right, play back my queues, give you guys the visualizer again. And here's our queue. There's Q3, there's 4, and then here's Q 4.5. It's exactly what we had when we were programmer. And we press play again, and here we are at Q5. So those, under normal circumstances, if we had changed the values in that queue, it would track forward, essentially. But because we did disable that track forward option queue, we essentially recorded a quote-unquote queue-only queue. Megan, do you have anything you want to add for that, or?
No, but I do. No, I think that was a really good explanation about tracking. Just the light's not going to change unless you change it. Basically is what's going to happen unless you tell it otherwise. But I want to talk about state, though, in the state of the queue just before we leave this.
Sure.
Just because the state of the queue is really good to know. So what we mean by state of the queue, and it could also help you with like understand tracking a little bit if you're like, I'm still kind of confused about it. So the state of the queue is what you're currently seeing on stage. So like if Noah opens Q3, for example, Q3 has tracking of some sort in it. And can we just focus on that window?
Yeah.
The joys of working from apart. So you can see that there's a show state button in here, and the show state button is going to, so with the show state button turned on, you can actually see your tracked values in here. So with show state on, you see these translucent values. Those are the values that are coming from a previous queue, one that was already recorded before. It doesn't matter if it was recorded 20 queues back or 1 queue back. It's being tracked into this queue. Then the red values are the hard values or the new values that are being added into this queue. So the only values that you're actually adding in Q3 are the colored values. It's not the position or the intensity, it's only the color. Whereas if you turn off show state, you'll only see the values that are currently added into the queue. So the new values in the queue. So by turning off show state, you're no longer seeing the total state of the queue. You're just seeing the new values here. So that means you only see the color. You don't see the translucent values with show state turned off. So again, state is the total value of the queue, whereas so it's exactly what you see on stage. That is what the state is of the queue. Right. Christian added in a question, what happens when the director wants to delete a scene that affects a lot of queues afterwards? When you delete, there is a track forward. Before you confirm, you should be able to turn off track forwarding and track so that it doesn't affect the queue, I believe, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you just say queue. So if like Q2 has information that's tracking forward, you would say Q2 delete or delete Q2, whichever one it is nowadays.
It's
And then you delete track. You would think I would know.
Q2. No, it's delete,
Yeah.
you right?
It's Q2 delete, and then we'll just disable that track forward. And then it's going to ask me if I want to do that. I'm going to say yes. And then that should still keep that information intact. So actually in this Q3, which is currently our second queue, let me switch back to the viz here. Here we are in Q3, technically. The positioned values, that's what I put in Q2, but yet that value is now sort of bumped into Q3. So here's Q1, lights are on. Q2, quote unquote, would have just put that position, but now I deleted it. But here we are in Q3, and now that position information is now sort of been pushed to the third queue. Going back with what Maegan said, and that was talking about state, is that let's look at two different examples here. So we've got Q 4.5, and let's say that I want to copy this queue to the following queue, let's say Q6. And you're going to see it looks a little weird. So let's say Q 4.5, copy to Q6, enter. And if I punch through, you'll note that Q6 does not look like Q 4.5. It's similar, right? You've got the red here and you've got the white, but they're coming towards the audience. But because of tracking, you're getting some of these tracked through this queue that are now coming into the next one. And so this is where you can also do copy and recording with state. So I'm going to delete that queue. And we're going to do this a little bit differently this time. I'm going to say Q 4.5, copy, and then on the bottom recording toolbar, there's a really handy button called state. And we're going to say Q6. And now let's take a look at it. So now I'm in Q5 here. I'm going to press play onto Q6. And now what we did is we've actually copied the state or the tracking values from the state of that queue in Q4 into this Q6. Those are my numbers here. So that's kind of a thing to keep in mind, is that if you are copying queues, you probably want to have state enabled if you are actually truly copying what you see on stage. Now that our numbers have gotten kind of weird, I do want to kind of point out there's a really handy button here called Renumber. And if you press it, all of your queues get renumbered into whole numbers, essentially. You can do that on a specific range of queues. So for example, if like you had queues 11 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, and 11.5, but you didn't want to renumber queues 1 through 10. You just wanted to renumber queues 11 through whatever. You can say queue 11 through 11.5 renumber, and it's going to only renumber that range that you've selected. So that's kind of a neat little function of the console as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I think a couple more Q&A
right.
questions came in, didn't they? Or no, was you
No, I
responded?
think that was just it.
Okay.
Let's stop there and leave the rest of our stuff for next week. Does that sound
Okay.
good?
Yep. Yeah, that makes
Yep.
sense.
Okay. So I'm gonna, yeah, yeah. So next week we're gonna do marking, timing, and then utilizing multiple cue lists, which I do all the time. It's actually what won me over as Hog as a theater desk, actually, for my effects and stuff. Um, but we're gonna keep these three things. We're gonna do talk about those three things tomorrow, next week, not tomorrow. No, next Thursday, same time, same place. Your computer, our computers. It's great. And then whatever time it is, wherever you are, that it starts. And then
And our
we're
dogs
also
and
going to talk
cats.
about pixel mapping and affecting and effects and all of that stuff, utilizing that kind of stuff in theater as well. Because you can do some cool things there. Noah, anything else?
Nope. I'll see you guys next week. We're gonna kind of stop the recording here, but we're gonna do a little bit of a Q&A here. So if you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them during this time. It could be related to what we talked about today, or it could be about anything hog related or industry related. We'll try to answer them as best as we can.
Yep. All right, and we'll see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.